Story 1. I finally spoke up in German after months of judgment and disrespect. My husband Peter, 29, and I, 27, have been married for about 3 years. We have one child together, and I was pregnant with our second. I'm Western Canadian while he is from Germany. We lived in Canada for a long time, but because of inflation, moving back to Germany seemed like a better option for us. We bought a nice house in Hannover where Peter is from. The day after our flights to Germany, we all visited Peter's family. This was the second time I have seen them. The first was at our wedding. They greeted us and brought us inside of the house, fussing over my son. We had dinner, and soon we left the house, wanting to settle into our new home. We visited Peter's family often for the next few months, but I had started to realize that they would sometimes speak about me in German. They would make rude comments on my hair and makeup, question my fashion choices, and overall were just very unkind to me. They also said mean things about my pregnant belly, which I was already insecure about. I ended up talking to my husband about this. I told him that I didn't like the way that they were treating me. I said that I hated how my every choice was judged. He told me that he would talk to his family. The next time that we went to his parents' house, there were no more mean comments. For about 3 months, it was like nothing ever happened. I gave birth to a perfect baby girl that we named Lilith. Peter's family was very upset when they heard the name. If you didn't know, Lilith means ghost or of the night. We didn't pick this name because of its meaning, but because it is a name that every girl in my family has had for many years. My middle name is Lilith, along with my mom's, my grandma's, and even my great-grandma's. For a while, I didn't visit my in-laws. I didn't want to hear them talk about how I shouldn't have named my daughter Lilith. But yesterday, we saw them again. It was my mother-in-law's birthday. As soon as we showed up, things started to go badly. Everybody wanted to hold Lilith, which made my mother-in-law upset because people weren't paying attention to her and made me overwhelmed. I didn't want people holding her. I was going through a pretty bad postpartum depression, and it was still pretty early to see people. I let people look at her, but declined when anyone asked to hold her. During dinner, I heard my sister-in-law talking to my mother-in-law in German. I heard her complaining about how she couldn't hold my baby. My sister-in-law even had the audacity to call me, and I quote, a fat, ugly, hokey addict. I turned to my sister-in-law and mother-in-law and told them off in German. I basically said that I have always known what they have said about me, but calling me names was the last straw. I also mentioned how I have known German for almost my whole life. The table instantly blew up. People were yelling at me because apparently this was all my fault. I left with Peter and we haven't talked to them since. An international wedding in the midst of 2021? House hunting in the hometown of your husband, and you did not at least visit the parents once? You speak German, and this never came up in several years? Not during the wedding, not in phone calls, video calls, never. Your husband talked to them and forgot to mention that you can understand them? Sorry, but the story sounds fishy to me. I have a very hard time believing any of this. The premise simply does not make any sense. Story 2. No matter how many times you explain your feelings, people still don't respect your choices. My brother, 30, is married to Haley, 29, and they're expecting a baby together. Last year, I, 17, officially changed my first name from Evelyn to Indy, which was a nickname form of my original middle name. My parents gave in after realizing how serious I was about being Indy and how I was not warming up to or growing into Evelyn. My brother and Haley want an older vintage name for their baby, and Haley asked me about 5 months ago why I disliked Evelyn enough to change the name. At the time, she brought up how popular the name has become and how vintage is back. I told her I didn't like vintage names, and to me it sounded really old-fashioned. I told her the popularity didn't influence my decision. She wanted to know my reason for disliking older names and why I liked something like Indy instead. I didn't mind her asking this first time. She brought it up again a week later, and she asked the same question and pressed more for why. She asked a third and a fourth time. I gave her the same answer and asked her why she kept asking me. I told her my answer wasn't going to change. By the 7th time she asked, she admitted she was worried her baby would hate having an older name and wanted to figure out what she could do to prevent what happened with me happening to her. She also said she'd like me to rethink my name because she thought Evelyn was beautiful and she was sad I had chosen something like Indy over it. I asked her to stop so many times already, and I even asked my brother to stop her. He told me I needed to understand it was the hormones. I can easily say she has asked me this more than 25 times by now. I'm not exaggerating that number either. 2 weeks ago when she brought it up again, she felt like I had made a mistake changing my name and how 30-year-old me wouldn't be so against Evelyn. I told her 30-year-old me can deal with it if that happens. She told me I didn't really have a good reason to like the name, and Indy seemed like the kind of name someone young likes, but not someone older. Then yesterday happened, and I kind of lost my temper. She started out asking the same stuff, and the baby is almost ready to be born, so I know it's coming to an end, but she asked me to really think about why and help her, because she couldn't figure out what she'd do differently than my parents did. Then she said, they really shouldn't have let me change my name so young. I snapped and I told her to stop asking me the same question because my answer won't change and her comments are not changing my mind because I don't like old-fashioned names. I told her I think they're awful and I'm sick and tired of hearing about how much better they are and having her try to make me find a reason she finds acceptable. I told her just like she hates Indy, I hate Evelyn, and she needs to let it go already. She burst into tears and my brother got so mad at me. My parents were also like, why did I have to speak to her so harshly? If someone continues to question your identity and they don't accept you for who you are, and if they ignore your explanation and request to move on, they are bullies and discriminatory. So, no surprise she burst into tears and is playing the victim now, because that's what entitled bullies do when they are challenged. Oh my God, it's not hormones. She is talking down to you and lecturing you because you're 17. She's saying you don't know what you want and shouldn't be allowed to choose anything for yourself. I'd be so mad. I'd have reamed her out just like you did. And she's only pregnant. I've been pregnant twice and it's not a terminal disease or an excuse to treat others badly. Your brother and mother should both tell to stop already. Story 3. Standing up for yourself means letting others deal with their own actions. I, 27, have been a part of a small friend group, around 8 people total, basically since college. For some background, 2 people from the group, Susan and Greg, are just absolute leeches. Going out for lunch, expect them to order the most expensive on the menu, then feed you some sob story about their finances, and then dump half the bill on you. Last weekend, Dan, one of the people from the group, told me about a casual dinner. I told him how if Susan or Greg were there, I wouldn't be able to come. He tells me that they would be there, but I should just put my opinions aside and come just once. This is kind of where I might be a terrible person. I agreed with him and told him I would be there. I show up and we all get to talking. Everyone began putting in their orders. Most of them spent about $40. There were only about 6 people there. When it gets to Susan and Greg, they both order expensive dishes, around $200. When it was my turn to order, everyone looked at me, but I just pick up the menu and point to the $4 Miller Lite and sent the waiter away. Dan asked why I hadn't ordered anything, and all I said was that I lost my appetite. The other 2 friends got up as well to cancel their orders and just have drinks. After the main courses came out, I saw Susan and Greg picking at their food. The waiter then brings over the check. Greg then grabs the waiter and asks him to split the check 6 ways. I stand up and correct him, saying the check was to be split 3 ways. Greg looks at me confused and asks why, since we always split the bill. I reminded him that 3 of us had not eaten any food, so we would just be paying for our drinks. So basically at the end of the night, Dan, who probably only ate around $50 worth of food, was stuck with a $146.98 check at the end. Yes, I remember the exact number. I swear I saw his jaw drop when he picked that receipt up. I slid a $10 bill towards the check, said goodbye everyone, and walked out. The next morning, I found my phone full of texts from Greg and Susan telling me I was an AH for not ordering any food and forcing them to pay more than they had accounted for. I honestly laughed because the steaks alone were more than what they had paid, but to each their own right. I also got a lot of messages from Dan saying that I could have just not came instead of pulling that stunt and getting him stuck with an outrageous bill. Edit. At this restaurant, the bar is separate, so drinks are on a separate bill if that makes sense. And if anyone is concerned about leaving a tip, I live in Australia. Edit 2. Hey guys, just wanted to clarify some things. 1. 90% of restaurants where I live, they don't do separate checks and might separate the bill for you if you're lucky. By the way, this post is in Australian dollars, so if you want the amounts in US dollars, you have to convert it. 2. Dan could have easily asked Greg and Susan to transfer him the money if he wanted, but he's always been about helping them through their financial hardship, even though they're just using him and keeps dragging me into it. I admit what I did was immature, but I'm tired of being forced to play along. It's his money, and if he wants to spend it on them, that's fine. But I'm not paying for them. 3. Also, Dan's a really good friend of mine, albeit blind AF. I was just trying to get him to see what kind of people he was helping. I will admit it was a tad bit petty. 4. Thank you for the gold. Is it not possible to ask the waiter for separate checks? Everyone gets their own check for what they ordered. Ahead of time? While some people think this is a little tacky, it's not anywhere near as tacky as ordering a meal that costs 5 times as much as anyone else's and expecting them to cover it. I thought what you did was brilliant. You started by saying you would not attend if the leeches were there. Your friend Dan wanted you to come anyway, so you did, but on your own terms. The moment you ordered only a beer, that was a signal that every adult at the restaurant should have recognized, especially because the bar bill is separate from the food. That you were not eating, 2 others were not eating, thus obviously not splitting a bill for dinner. I bet Dan will not be so quick to include Susan and Greg again. Story 4. Some boundaries should never be crossed, especially when it comes to respecting someone's memory. My wife was a corporate lawyer and mediator. She had some very nice work clothes. She was diagnosed with ovarian cancer and was gone in 2 years. The last 6 months of her life were hell. My sister Sarah didn't do anything for us during that time. My wife never liked her. I do not like her. She is a selfish cow. At my wife's wake, she started asking about my wife's clothes, and I brushed her off. She wanted to pick out a few pieces to remember my wife by, and I ignored her. It's been 6 months, and I've attended my mom's birthday, but I'm still not in the mood to deal with people. Then Sarah comes, asking about my wife's clothes. I told her my wife wanted me to donate them to this women's shelter, and she often helped. It will help women in need with their own court cases, court appointments, and job interviews. My sister Sarah said my wife was even selfish in death. I asked her what did she mean? And she started going off on how my wife always thought she was better than her, and it's not far that the clothes are going to charity and not to family. I told my sister I would rather see my wife's clothes lit on fire than on her back. My sister started crying, and my mom came over to see what was wrong. My mom told me to be easy on my sister because she was talking about my wife's death hard. The insanity of that coming out of my mom's mouth made me grab my gift and leave. My mom acts like I had to ruin her birthday by being melodramatic, but I cannot believe their emotional blackmail towards me over clothes that they have no right to. Besides the fact that you are following your wife's wishes, your sister is acting like a vulture. And why is your mother worrying about your sister taking your wife's death hard when you were the one who lost their wife? So, no, you are doing nothing wrong. You are still grieving, your sister is treating you like a thrift store, and your mother is completely ignoring your grief because another family member is better at being dramatic. It's your wife. How dare Sarah mention it at the funeral? Entirely selfish and classless and callous to your pain. And then to bring it up again and say, it's to remember your wife by, she doesn't care about your wife and never did. And then to insult your deceased wife by calling her selfish. Your mom is also a problem. Sarah is having a hard time with your wife's death? Really? Not you, the husband? I'm sorry, but your sister and your mom suck. You should reevaluate why they're in your life and if they deserve to be. Story 5. The truth doesn't fit the narrative others create, and that's their problem, not mine. I'm 42, dating Tim, 59, a widower. He's in banking, I'm a bartender. I know what it looks like. His 2 daughters thought the same thing, but he's broke as a joke and I've got a trust fund, so actually no. He's broke because his late wife got cancer. 3 times. He ran up 6 credit cards, second mortgage on the house, cashed out his retirement, everything and anything to get her the treatment she needed, and then to get treatment enough to see both daughters married. His daughters live 6 hours drive away. We drove to them for Christmas last year and the year before. They ignored me, dragged Tim away when he tried to include me, and prevented their husbands from making even small talk with me by talking over me. Year 1. Tim chastised them. They apologized. To him, not me. They blamed the pain of seeing their dad with a woman who wasn't their mum. Year 2, they did it again. This year, I told Tim not again. He could go, I would never ask him not to see his daughters for Christmas, but I'll stay here. Tim didn't love the idea because me going with him means we can share the responsibility of driving when his back starts to bother him. He hates to fly. His 2010 death trap is starting to go anyway, so I leased him a comfy luxury ride. My brother has a dealership. He called the girls, super excited that he'd be able to see them more often without having to worry about his back, who then blew up and accused him of spending their mother's money on a terrible house and car to impress some bimbo bartender and didn't offer them a dime for their weddings. In the ensuing argument, it came out that they assumed there had been a life insurance policy, nor did they have any idea about the credit card debt or the second mortgage that the house was underwater on, or that Tim was looking at foreclosure and bankruptcy until he moved in with me. They did not realize it was my house, that he pays no bills save the water bill, man takes excessive showers, and shared groceries. Now the girls want my number. They are sorry I felt lonely at Christmas. They want to come visit and stay with us next year. Conveniently, in summer, I live near a beach. I've told Tim absolutely not about giving out my number. I'm happy to be polite if they come to visit Tim, but we're not going to be friends. If they had talked to me for even 2 seconds, they'd have understood. I am not shy about admitting the only thing I have ever contributed to my blessed financial state is not developing a crippling coke addiction like my cousin Danny did. Tim thinks I'm being too unforgiving. They would have warmed up to me eventually, but knowing how generous I am being with their father has made them warm up quicker. I maintain I don't care about now or later. They had their chance to not be catty brats over incorrect assumptions that I was taking advantage of him.